Hello, and thank you for joining the podcast Emergency Minute. Your host is an emergency medicine physician who brings over 20 years of experience in healthcare. Dr. Parente will take you through some of the trending topics and challenges faced in the ER and all of healthcare. Join in the fight against misinformation, and don't forget to follow on social media at Dr. J. Parente. Now, here's your host, Dr. John Parente.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Emergency Minute. This is episode 32 and the second episode for 2026. Hopefully you enjoyed our last episode with medical malpractice attorney Stephen Crandall as we explored things that physicians and patients need to know about malpractice and, unfortunately, how broken the healthcare system is. If you haven't checked it out yet, shame on you. Just kidding. Don't worry, it's not too late. You can still check it out. Today's topic is AI in healthcare, and I have a fantastic guest who is an expert in this matter. Who is that, you ask? Dr. Josh Russell is a board-certified palliative care and emergency medicine physician, medical malpractice expert, health and legal tech co-founder and investor, and the current chief medical officer for UCP Merchant Medicine, where he's leading clinical oversight for IntelliVisit, a machine learning-based source of clinical reasoning being used in over 1 million urgent care visits per year. Crazy. All right, so without further ado, please welcome Dr. Josh Russell to Emergency Minute. Josh, thank you for coming to the show.
Hey, John, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so it's great to have you. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to Dr. Patrick O'Malley and the shift change application that he's been working on. That's actually how you and I met and have led to this podcast. And if you're a physician or healthcare professional and you haven't heard about this yet, it's a great platform and an opportunity to sort of connect with other like-minded entrepreneurs in healthcare that are doing anything from podcasting to running an urgent care to running a med spa to any other entrepreneurial type activities. So just a huge shout out to Patrick, who I always say is like the mayor of physician entrepreneurs.
Yeah, if you're feeling like a fish out of water with your group, you'll be right at home on shift change.
Well said. Well said. So to kick off the show, obviously today's topic is really exciting. Very definitely in the news right now is AI in healthcare, especially within the emergency room. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your background first. Like how does one go from EM doc to chief medical officer of a medical AI software company?
Yeah. A lot of it is luck and timing. So I won't pretend that it was all like brilliant strategy on my part, but I will say that it was clear to me for rewinding back, not that long. It feels like a long time, but the early 2025, maybe late 2024, I used ChatGPT for the first time, and probably everyone remembers their first time with one of the large language models, which I presume most of your listeners have used in some fashion at this point. And, just mind-boggling in terms of asking it to write a poem and, asking it for any synthesis of information and the output being apparently like magic. And it was clear to me that it was going to change everything. And I started a sort of process like I do with anything that I become passionate about is just like I'm an autodidact by nature and just learn and teach myself everything that I am interested in learning. And so to that end, I started sort of listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, going to webinars, reading lots of blogs and newsletters. And it was just so hard to wrap my head around what was this technology. And I've come to learn that, despite being the inventors or creators of these large language models, even the leaders of these AI companies really don't know what's happening under the hood. They don't really fully understand it. They can kind of talk about it in broad strokes in the same way kind of we understand how the human brain works. But I was still feeling very ill at ease about how much effort I was putting in and not really catching the wave, understanding the movement. So I started to loosely look at opportunities to work within companies that are doing things in the space. And it just so happened I used to work for a company called MRAP, which I presume a lot of your listeners know. And I oversaw the UC Max product, which was the urgent care, is the urgent care program. And I was interviewing my current boss, who started this company called UCP Merchant Medicine a long time ago. And then they acquired this product called IntelliVisit. And it's a machine learning platform. We'll talk about maybe some of these terms a little bit later, but it's not a large language model. It's a model that they've acquired, and then I've continued to help them build. And after the interview, he basically offered me a job. It was not my current job as CMO, but it's a relatively small company. And as soon as I joined and I was in it every day, it's almost like learning a language. Like I studied French for 12 years in school, and I couldn't speak a lick of it. And then I did a semester abroad, and like the curve, the slope of the curve of learning when you're immersed in something and you're solving problems within that and with it is so much faster. So it became, clear to me from those experiences, this was a great opportunity, even if it wasn't like immediately the most like sexy, appealing, easy to explain to my friends and family sort of career move. And that has just snowballed because I guess seeing the writing on the wall that the technology was going to be overtaking all of the world and healthcare specifically, being on the inside relatively early has offered me opportunities like talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we do talk about this and the use of AI specifically in the clinical, setting. And I guess the question is, of all the things that we were going to talk about, because I know we talked about a lot of different ideas, like why AI? Why did we land upon AI, do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such an important question, right? Because it's often overlooked, and especially when you are dealing with problems that are very onerous to the clinicians, to the patients, to the health systems. We have a very complicated, fragmented, dysfunctional healthcare system. I don't need to explain that. And so there's an expression like, if you're drowning, any line that's thrown to you looks appealing, even if that line is barbed wire. And I think we've underappreciated the sacrifices, the risks of AI in the hopes that it would save us from this disaster of a situation that we find ourselves in modern healthcare. And so that's really, I think, the genesis of this is that we have a healthcare system that's $5 trillion, I think, annually, 20% of our GDP, and we don't have good outcomes. We have the worst outcomes of any developed country in the world, and we have a huge burnout problem. And so it looks really appealing, but I mean, this is actually, there's many examples of this. Probably one of the more recent ones is the opioid crisis. Is there was a huge concern about undertreated pain, and that's how the pain fifth vital sign debacle unfolded. And in that situation, we looked at OxyContin and opioids more generally as, hey, they're like less risky than we thought, and this is a great solution, and it'll get us out of this predicament. And it didn't end up going well, is the short version of it, because when you're in a dire situation, any sort of possible solution you over index on the benefits and under represent in your mind and in the discussions usually the harms or the potential harms.
Right. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about, those risks later, because that's definitely something I want to get into. But before we get into the risks, what are some of the benefits that you've seen? Like, I know I've started to see some of these things in my place of work. There's things like OpenEvidence. I know there's other people have done, like, there's a million companies out there, it feels like, that are doing like scribe type things. What else have you seen that's like, what are some of the benefits that could help us potentially?
Yeah, I mean, they're myriad. There's this concept of practicing at the top of your license, and it's so cliche that I don't think we really think about what that means. But what it means is that you are finding that you're mostly doing the things that you're well trained and have the experience and expertise to do. And there's a very small fraction of the time that we're working clinically that's actually the case. And the administrative burden, even though the EMR was sold to us as an efficiency solution and it's going to make our lives easier, it is 100% been 180 degrees from that. Yeah, 2 thumbs down. So for those of us who've lived through that, I had paper charts when I first started out of residency, and for those of us who've lived through that transition and had many hours of our lives stolen by unnecessary clicks and, being interrupted through 6 different channels now, it offers some ray of hope that all of that may not have been for naught, because we couldn't have gone from paper charts to ambient AI scribes, right? You have to have the painful transition, the awkward teenage years of just the naked EMR, as I like to call it. And that is, there's hope in that. And I've used ambient software. There's, I think, over 100 funded companies. So you're right. And quite frankly, I built my own ambient AI using Claude Code the other day, and it is not perfect, but it works fine. Not using patients because there's a whole compliance thing, but it's just the software building has been so commoditized that I think it's going to be passe to think about 10 years from now, like in the way that probably young people in your life think it's crazy that you used to leave voice messages or, have a rotary phone or something like that. So that's amazing, and we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of the ways that we can solve problems if we just are able to all build our own software. The ambient scribes, I would say, is the biggest use case, probably clinically. Reference material is great, and I want to talk about the downside or the risks of that, because I see various use cases where people are just using it as they would have used UpToDate before, and then they find like OpenEvidence. I love OpenEvidence. I'm a good friend with one of the early employees there, Ethan Sparza, and so you get to talk to him a lot about what they're doing. I think they have a good mission. It's amazing to have something that's sort of clinician only focused, and you can really rely on what its output is because of the guardrails it has against pulling in stuff from influencers like wellness blogs and stuff like that. So I love that for a reference case. I love how it can generate discharge instructions that I can feel good about just copying and pasting. But so those are the main benefits that I see. Like here's a great example. Like you can take a photo now of, I have like a work phone for the ER I work at. I take a photo and just upload it into the OpenEvidence app and of all the patient's medications and say like, which of these can cause like LFT abnormalities or something like that.
Right.
Whereas before it would be like, entering 20 different medications into some sort of interactions checker, and it was 20, 30 minutes of your time. So those things where you shave off things that aren't at the top of our scope, or that are just not rewarding by their nature, that is tremendous. And we went to medical school, residency, all this, sacrifice to get to a place where we had the privilege, and that's why they call them privileges in the hospital, of taking care of patients. But when our job feels like we're, managing technology and not interacting with patients, it's not surprising that people find lack of meaning and burnout, almost inevitable.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely been one of the things that I've loved. Your example of the using it for medications is fantastic. The other thing that I've done a lot of is, you get that rash and you're just like, I'm not exactly sure what this rash is. And you can upload it and the results are astounding. And, just to the average person out there listening, like, look, we're not just like uploading this and then willy nilly, like, oh, that's what you have. Like, at that point, it gives you either a differential or it says it's a pretty good likelihood of this. And then I go and I read and I'm like, oh yeah, that actually does make sense. And this is, that kind of fits this clinical picture, and then go back and give the patient probably a better answer. And the reality of most of these rashes in the ER are not, all that important anyways. They're important to the patients, but they may not be like life threatening. But at the end of the day, I feel like that does sort of enhance the quality of care that we're able to provide. And to your point, it makes us more efficient. We're not flipping through some old textbook looking at pictures or Googling random images. Some of these things, there actually is some pretty good clinical acumen for them. So absolutely.
Yeah. And so I can't overstate that it's great that there are tools. I think there is a tremendous risk, though. My main concern about AI from an individual standpoint, not from like a whole society standpoint, is that when the tools become a crutch, we can lose the ability to walk.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, I like that. So it does seem that AI is moving at light speed, with its growth and its evolution here. But as you know, healthcare does not move at that pace for anything or anyone. Why do you think there's such disconnect between the speed of that evolution process?
Yeah, it's a great point. And we've seen things in our daily lives become effortless with the use of various AI tools and non-AI tools. And then we go to work and we see things being done in a very analog, sort of 1995 to 2010 fashion, somewhere in there. And the disconnect can be incredibly painful, because it could go faster, and you're in the emergency department, you need to take care of things with relative expediency. The real barriers are that healthcare in general is risk averse, and that's reflected in the two main sources of resistance, or the governors against like rapid technology adoption, which have, again, trade-offs. They're pros and cons. But from the clinical applications side of things, there's the FDA and the FDA approval process. And from the sort of clinician interacting with the patient sort of side of the equation, there is all the HIPAA and privacy laws, which is often used as the scapegoat for another phenomenon, which is because we have a healthcare system that's largely different for-profit companies delivering the healthcare. They silo their data. So this interoperability problem is, often HIPAA is blamed, but it is as much that this company doesn't want to share their data with this other company, because then if you're a patient of health system A, you're going to keep going to health system A, and they count on that revenue from you continuing to go to health system A, even if you're not that happy, because there's a cost of changing. But if you go to health system B, and you're going to have a better experience, the patient might be inclined to do that, but not doing that because health system B doesn't have all their records. And so even if you're in Epic, which is probably, most of your listeners, EMR, you see, if you use Care Everywhere and the health information exchange on it, you'll see fragments of visits from other places, like maybe the medications that were prescribed, but you don't often see the full clinical notes. You can't often pull up the images. And that is not HIPAA per se. It's partially privacy related, but it's more that they are protecting their claim on this patient, the lifetime value of this patient coming back to me, because I'm not going to let this other health system have full unfettered access to all the records from what's happened here.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, and I do see that with health systems here in like Northeast Ohio. Obviously, can't use any names, but you definitely start to see that. And it does seem like you get in bed with that EMR, and then that does seem to sort of keep the patient in that health system. Just as you said, we see that every day. So
right.
Now something I wanted to, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and because the costs are patient safety related, then there's always that as the reason for not progressing. But there's also the converse, which is how many patients are getting delayed care, are getting inaccurate care, and the technologies that are being withheld or inhibited from being released into the market, or even on a health system level, like you can't use this thing in our system because it hasn't passed like SOC 2 and all these different high trust. There's a million different security and safety things. Not saying that's not important, but there's an expression: don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And so, we're not dealing with perfection. So it's not that the comparator should be an ideal case scenario. The comparator should be the real world scenario. In the same way, like Waymo gets blamed, the automatic driverless Ubers or Lyfts, basically, that exist in several of the larger cities in the United States. They have tremendous safety compared to human drivers, but they're not being compared to human drivers. They're being compared to perfection. Like one accident is too many, even if 10 accidents, 10 accidents with humans would happen for one accident with them. And I think we're seeing the same thing in terms of the bar of what needs to be proven for safety and reliability being set so high. For comparing it to human beings, medical errors are, you see them every day. And thankfully, most of them don't result in irreparable harm to patients. But the AI systems that are being scrutinized and blamed for small faults are certainly, by and large, less reliable than the humans that they would be not even replacing, but just augmenting.
Yeah, and that's critical too. And one of the things I did on my last show is I talked with a medical malpractice attorney, and one of the things I told him is like, look, in the emergency room when I'm juggling 25 patients active at one point, which is not safe or ideal for anyone, you're juggling 1,000 balls in the air. You're gonna drop some, and you just hope that the ones you drop are either caught by someone else or the system that's involved and in place, or that you're able to detect it quick enough that no harm comes to the patient. And for the vast majority of these cases, it doesn't. But it does seem as we get sort of pressured to see more and more and have less and less available to us, this at some point sort of comes to a head. And I think the hope, what we talked about here in this last segment, was that AI might be able to bridge that and help us get to that point where we're more efficient with those same, or God forbid, fewer resources.
Yeah, I love what you brought there about the juggling, so many balls. Is that 20 is amazing. I could juggle 3 and, I drop them pretty frequently, but, it brings up the idea of our working memory, which is sort of just the neuroscience term for how much we can cognitively take on simultaneously. And it's anywhere from, I've heard figures from about 5 to 9 sort of pieces of information can be sort of held. And I think that's somehow like not directly related, but how they came up with the 7-digit phone number. But basically, if you can recall remembering phone numbers, but basically we cannot deal with too many plates spinning or balls in the air, whatever metaphor you'd like to use, before our ability to reason gets like to zero. Basically, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how well trained you are, you can't balance 10 things simultaneously. And so, I'd throw the question back to you: is when you're juggling these balls, how many of these balls seem like they are me working through the correct management or, diagnostic reasoning of a patient, versus how many of these balls are responding to messages, trying to cue who I should page and when I should page them, who's on call for this service and it's going to change in 10 minutes. And that person's going to be like a little bit more likely to, come down and see the patient, whatever the case may be. I mean, where do you think the balance lies for you?
Yeah, for me, it's just about keeping everybody alive. I hate to say that, but like when it gets to that point, which, for the average listener, it's not every single day, but like there was a shift last week where I had 25 active patients in the emergency room, and it was me and another PA. That's it.
Wow.
And that was active. That was not people who were admitted or people who were boarded. So at that point, you have to take a step back and just like, okay, I mean, you triage, you literally do mental triage, and you're doing this sort of mental gymnastics to be like, okay, hold on. Who's the sickest patient right now? What do I need to make sure that I don't drop one of their balls? Okay, what do they need medication wise, intervention wise? Have I ordered all the right tests? And you kind of start second guessing yourself, which is a good thing, by the way. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of just start working your way down. And sorry, I've said this for 3 years making social media content. If you're there with a sore throat, or if you're there with a sprained ankle and you wonder, why the hell does this take so long? This is why. Because if you're there with a sore throat or you're there with a sprained ankle, at that moment in time, you're not that important. At that moment in time, I need to make sure that the people who are in septic shock on pressors and, did I order the antibiotic? God forbid I don't, order the cultures for the sepsis police to come knock at my door in the middle of the night. So I think at that point it becomes a triage level. Now, that's not every single shift, every single day, although it does seem to be more frequent. But I think it's, to your point, there's only so much like data that we can sort of digest in a short period of time. And I'd be, I know this is going to sound like I'm being very egocentric for ER docs here, but I would challenge any other profession on earth to see if they could quantify the number of decisions and the amount of data that we digest in a 12-hour shift. And I think ER docs would be as high as any.
Yeah, I would have a hard time arguing with that. I mean, it sounds self-aggrandizing, but it's the reality. And that says nothing to do about the behavioral issues that we have to deal with, with our staff and with the patients. Thankfully, more with the patients, but on average. And wow, there's so much to respond to there. I think the thing I say about the stress of emergency medicine is that we have to be the most resourceful people in the hospital, because we are dealing necessarily with the least resourceful people. You can have any problem under the sun, and as long as you have one of these and a service, and you can press 3 numbers on it, you can get in front of a doctor in pretty short order. And so the people that don't know how to solve their problems for themselves or access a system in other ways are going to be in front of us. And that's, largely like the sore throats and the medication refills or whatever the case may be. Not to say that it's always inappropriate, but it's just not going to be the top priority. But I imagine after the end of that shift, were you using an ambient scribe during that shift?
I haven't used it yet because for what we're doing right now, it's still a copy paste situation. Like it doesn't enter directly into so by the time I copy paste it and modify it, I'm actually pretty fast with Dragon that I could just do the Dragon. Yeah. So I've not yet adopted that, but I keep getting pushed to do so.
Well, so this is the times when I find the ambient the most helpful is when I have to necessarily give that working memory to actually ensuring that I'm thinking about the patient appropriately and administering the right medications in the right timing, have the right differential, all that kind of actual doctor brain stuff. And if you don't have the ambient scribe going at the end, you're sitting on a ton of cases that you have to now like recreate. It's like the most demoralizing thing at the end of the shift. But there's truly shifts like that where you don't have time to chart. So I do find it really helpful because at least jogs my memory for the, was it the left foot or the right foot kind of cases.
Right.
And even more importantly, from like the core function that we have is that you're not distracted by those administrative tasks piling up, at least from a charting standpoint, because that you have technology supporting you so that at the end of the shift, you have not as onerous a task of recreating the events of every case. And that is, those kind of things are like, this is really a strong case for this being something that everyone should at least have some familiarity with and give a try to, because they've gotten a lot better. I tried one a year ago, and to your point, I could do a note faster because it was a huge, long, set of paragraphs for even simple cases, and it was often bringing things in that were relevant, leaving things out that were relevant. And one of the interesting things we could talk about more, but is that when we talk about things, we're relying on mental models. So if I say Ford Mustang, you probably have an image of something that is pretty similar to what mine is. The Ford Mustang hasn't changed substantively in the last 20 years. But if I say, ambient AI scribe, and you've tried one once and it was a year ago, and I tried and I'm using one daily, then we have different mental models and we're not even talking about the same thing. Right. And that's really the hard part. I mean, there's so many different reasons why communicating about AI is difficult, but that is one of the key ones. Is we're talking about things that have really substantively changed in a very, very short period of time.
Well, I agree, and I definitely think that it's going to evolve, and I think this will be one of those things, like you said, that's just completely second nature here within the next few years, where we look back and laugh and be like, kind of like what you were saying. Like I remember we used to talk on the telephone and leave messages for people. Just the other day, I told my daughter, go knock on the neighbor's door, and she's like, "Is that a thing?" I'm like, "Yes." Like they're old school like me. Like that used to be a thing. Now, the comedian Sebastian Maniscalco does a bit where he talks about like how if people show up at your door now, like it's like everybody hide, get on the floor, like this is very abnormal, but it's funny how times change.
Yeah. And so quickly here. So I think it's hard for us to keep up, and the pace of change. I wrote a blog post on my website. You can read it, but it's why the pace of change feels different to different people. I think you and I are, roughly the same generation, but if you're 70 or 80 years old, you have 70 or 80 years of life that you have to draw on experiences from. And you've probably also had some cognitive decline. So expecting people who are in their 60s and 70s to be as facile about this or keep up with it the way that people younger are is not possible. And we're getting to a point really where it's like probably the limit of AI progress is just going to be that people can't keep up with it no matter how young you are, because the pace is so fast.
Right. That's what I tell people all the time. Like, you may not like it, you may not agree with it, whatever that may be, but you either got to be on board or you're going to be left behind with this thing. So you might as well start trying to at least get on this train a little bit.
Yeah. Burying your head in the sand is a very natural response to being overwhelmed, and sort of like the shell shock meltdown sort of scenario. And it doesn't lead to survival, though. That's not a good thing if you're on the battlefield and you get overwhelmed. you kind of just lose the sense of being able to care about what's going on around you. You're putting yourself in tremendous harm's way, and I think you're putting yourself in maybe not as immediately precarious harm's way if you try to ignore AI and just like hope that it goes away because it's overwhelming. There's a quote from a past president of the AMA and regarding the fear that exists in all professions, but in medicine specifically, that we're going to be replaced by AI. And he said that in the near term, AI is not going to replace doctors, but doctors who use AI efficiently will replace doctors who don't.
Oh, that's well said. I like that. Well, I do want to get into the sort of negative side of AI, which I think is really fascinating. But before I do that, I want to mention really quickly that I am wearing Solea scrubs. And I don't know if you had a chance to ever check these out. This is one of the ER Doc founders is by the name of Dr. Anthony Gwines, a good friend of mine. This is a 100% clinician-owned company, the most comfortable scrubs on planet Earth. I cannot recommend them high enough. Just has completely changed my life. You can ask my wife. She's like, oh, I'm like, you got to have my scrubs clean. Like I only have 3 pairs. I got to get some more. But anyways, so be sure to give these guys a try. Solea scrubs, Soleya, and you will not be disappointed. It'll definitely change the way you go to work. So as far as the risks, we talked about this, and we talked about, being cautious with the use of AI. I know there's this word out there, this digital dementia, which I've heard now just recently. Can you touch a little bit on some of these things? Is this just fear mongering, or is there some actual meat to this argument here?
Well, I would say there's more than meat. I think it's the most existential risk that we face from AI on an individual level. And the best comparator, I think, for AI, whether it's good or bad, there's always debate. And there's a movie that just came out called The AI Doc, which I highly recommend. I think it does a good high level summary. So in 2 hours, you could probably get caught up, as it were, with what the different factions are saying and what their arguments are about, is this going to save humanity or wreck humanity? But the closest analogy to use, sort of to place AI in context, is this like nuclear energy. Is it good or is it bad? Well, it depends. It depends on how it's used, and it depends on if the power of it is respected or not. And even when the power is respected, things like Chernobyl happened. So we have to take into account that we are creating something, especially towards AGI, artificial general intelligence, as a goal that would be smarter than us. And we don't, by definition, have the intellect to be able to control that. There's a researcher in computer science named Stuart Russell, no relation, although I wish it were, who talks about this as the gorilla problem, meaning that if the gorillas had created humans, and I guess in evolution history something like that kind of happened, but and then humans obviously developed superior ability to use technology, develop technology, intelligence, we could wipe out all the gorillas on the planet Earth right now, and they wouldn't really have so much to say about it or be able to do anything to stop it. And there's no way that, similarly, we can say that if we create AGI, there's this, can we just unplug it? Can we just turn it off? I mean, it's going to know that that's going to be our plan. That's pretty clear that we're creating something. If we have to have a better plan than that. And so I think that us being able to control this super intelligent, sort of new species that we're creating is definitely optimistic in the best case scenario. So that, there's existential risks. And one of the things that is, there's a significant disincentive to be honest about these. If you're Sam Altman or any of the CEOs of these large language model companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera, because their, business is predicated on people not questioning what they're doing, not demanding guardrails. And they're even in such a place now where the amount of money that's coming in, they're willing to take risks from breaking the law standpoint in various different ways and say, well, we'll pay, $100 billion if it comes to that in fines, which it usually doesn't. But in order to not slow this progress. Like the pace of progress is the main incentive, because there's nothing to keep these for-profit companies from doing anything other than acting like for-profit companies. And we have a huge problem with the fact that, you and I are behind, everyone's sort of behind, and people that are especially behind are the 70 and 80 and 90-year-olds that are, in our Congress and various governments. So I have tremendous concern, to put it lightly, about the future of AI in broad strokes. But what can you do about that? I mean, we could talk about some organizations. The Center for Humane Technology is one I would follow. They're doing good work in this space. But on an individual level, there is a mental fitness standpoint that we need to be aware of, because it's not immediately obvious. But the trade-off here is that if you're trying to do something efficiently, you're necessarily doing it in a way that is less challenging for your mind. So you're choosing, am I going to stress my mind in the same way that I stress my body and to work out and stay strong? Or am I going to use a large language model to write this email that I could spend 20 minutes doing, and it's going to force me to think? And I'm therefore outsourcing that cognitive capacity. And this is what digital dementia gets at. And if you think it's, first of all, we've all experienced it. So it's not a question of if it exists. Like, you can read studies about it, but we talked about this. How many phone numbers do you remember now versus when you were 15 years old? So and this is a very narrow use of our broad cognitive abilities, is remembering phone numbers. But even like more specifically, GPS is a more recent example. I try to not use it too much, but if I'm in a different place, traveling, or if there's traffic considerations, I find I'm using it more than not. And it's convenient, but I'm outsourcing my ability to navigate, and I get lost more than I used to. That's the nature of it. But if we outsource our thinking, and writing is probably the most broad, like, a way that we use our thinking, then our brains lose that broad ability to synthesize a lot of complex information. And you mentioned, you're checking yourself on shift. You're like, sort of having a conversation with yourself. Am I doing the right thing? Did I order the right antibiotics? Whatever the case may be. And that self-reflection is tremendously important. And we lose that if we have the technology write our notes wholesale. So I don't have it do my MDM, because to me, that is my mental exercise of keeping myself in check. And the MDM, medical decision-making portion, is basically like, this is what this patient came in with. This is what I thought might be going on. This is what I did to sort of parse through that. And this is the conclusion I came to and the steps that I took. And like you mentioned, working with an attorney, one of my companies I work with, Experitas, so we work with a ton of attorneys, and one of them said that if you can't convince yourself, you can't convince a jury. And so you should be having that mental check, like, am I doing the right thing here? And if you can't write it out in a way that's like intellectually honest and consistent with sound medical practice, you probably can't convince a jury. But like, if you skip that step because you're like, oh, well, the scribe will do that for you. It will write a whole set of reasoning, which is variable in quality depending on the product and the patient. You're like, it's the movie WALL-E. Like, you're floating, you're using this like motorized floating wheelchair to get around instead of walking, and you lose the ability to walk. Well, I mean, losing the ability to think is much more critical for who we are as people, and broadly, it's what our value is as physicians. Largely is being able to be expert and use all of our experience and intuition to solve cases.
Well, and that's the whole argument against being replaced by AI, right? Is that we still have the ability to sort of critically think and make those decisions. And so to your point, like, I think there's going to have to be a time where you have that balance where I'm using AI to augment myself as a clinician, but not necessarily replace the sort of mental gymnastics and those sort of fitness, the, critical thinking fitness that goes into that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like fitness, I think fitness is the right word. No one's going to tell you to work out. Depending on who you're married to, maybe they will. But like, generally, it is on every individual to keep track of their own fitness, and from a physical fitness standpoint. And I worry more about digital dementia too, because, well, for several reasons. One is there's an aesthetic reason to work out. Like people want to have abs and they want to have bigger muscles and lose fat and such. There's not an aesthetic reason to not have technology think for you. And so because social media, yada, yada, we are increasingly sort of a superficial society. I think a lot of people that are working out on GLP-1s, whatever they're doing for their fitness, that are, if they're being honest, mostly about wanting to look good, and the importance of that. And because there's no like looking good equivalent, and I don't think there's, from the highest level, and not going to get into specifics, but there's just like not a high level sort of robust intellectual discourse and dialogue going on anymore. Everything's coming down, and we're actually seeing that with this intelligence test over time on average. So there's a thing called the Flynn effect, which was well established over the second half of the 20th century, that regardless of which intelligence test you're looking at, if you look at averages across populations, people are getting more intelligent. And then around 2010, that flipped, and every year since, people have been getting less intelligent, which really closely coincides to the advent of the smartphone, really. And that doesn't have a lot of, the initial versions weren't doing a lot of thinking for us, but they were fragmenting our attention and making us use our brains in a much more passive way, if you even call it using your brain. And so there were effects noticeable about that. I think these effects could be a lot more dramatic. And there's a study, it's not been peer reviewed to my knowledge yet, but it was done in MIT students, and like the high level TLDR is that these were healthy brains, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds at MIT, and over 6 weeks, they saw tremendous decline objectively. I think they were using EEG, but also objectively, functionally, in terms of their performance on tests and their ability to recollect assignments that they had done. The group that was using just the old-fashioned way, I will call it, and the group that was using large language models to write their assignments, there was a huge difference between the two groups. And the group that was using the LLMs, even over 6 weeks, there was a huge difference from them from the beginning to the end. So these are, if this is a healthy and bright 18-year-old, which is about the healthiest brain you can have, then I think all the rest of us are much more susceptible to it. And there's really not a lot of people talking about it. And there's a lot of appeal in our fast-paced culture to do things more efficiently. So I can't overstate how concerned I am about it. But I do ultimately think that other than sounding the alarm, the most important thing you can do is sort of self-monitor and keep track of it like your own fitness, because if you don't use it, you lose it, is true. And our biggest risk individually as a doctor is not being replaced by AI. But if AI becomes smarter than us, and we are relying on it, and it's not like augmenting us, we're augmenting it in some fashion, or at least allowing it to interface with patients, that's a reality where we don't really have value anymore. And that would be the reality, personally, that I would want to protect myself against.
Yeah, I'm just glad that you brought up that since 2010, everyone's getting dumber, because I thought it was just me. I subscribe to the box theory that there's only so many boxes in your brain, and if you shove one in on this side, then it has to come out on the other side. So
I've heard that as penguins on the iceberg. There's only room for so many penguins on the iceberg, but it's the same concept.
Yeah. So I guess the follow up to that then becomes, especially in light of the fact that my last show, hopefully you had a chance to check that out, be out here just in a little bit, was the conversation with the medical malpractice attorney, where we talked about liability. And there are some cases in healthcare, as you know, where you can be held medically liable if you do something or if you don't do something. TNK, with stroke patients is one. You can be liable if you give it and there's a bad outcome. You can also be liable if you don't give it and there's a bad outcome. Another thing is like high dose steroids for spinal cord injury, which is always like seemingly all over the map medical legally. So where do you think where is this going to, impact liability with AI? Because it's like, well, if you'd use it, there may be liability, but if you didn't, there may be liability too.
Yeah, it's a classic damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario. I just prefer those patients don't come in during my shift. That's the best protection against those situations. But yeah, I mean, I work with a startup called Experitas, which you've been a collaborator on. And So what we're doing is using AI tools basically to streamline the expert review process, and it's for lawyers predominantly, although we want to service medical boards and insurance carriers, anyone who's trying to evaluate the appropriateness of care from an expert standpoint. And so I work with a lot of attorneys, and I asked a lot of them this question. I think everyone's speculating is the first answer I would say, but at some point, the standard of care is going to become that you should have used AI in some scenario where some you did something allegedly wrong and something bad happened to a patient, in broad strokes. When that time comes is going to be defined kind of by us as experts, because standard of care is defined by the expert, but that precedent is going to send ripples throughout the personal injury and med mal community. Another interesting thought exercise as well, if this digital dementia continues as the underlying principles that are causing it in the first place continue, largely being human nature, then there's going to be sort of a question about, like, is the standard of care like defined by the AI, or is it defined by the physician, the clinician? Because it'll shift at some point. Like, you can imagine the transition stage is almost like the EMR to the AI is like the middle stage is going to be where it's pretty well balanced, and the AI is helping the physician, but the AI is going to get smarter while we get less smart. And then it's going to become sort of, you want to, you can't really blame the physician almost, because they have been trained and like the crutch totally reliant on the AI. So that's the situation I really worry about. And we're already in a situation where we want the answers fast. And if we get the right answer 9 times out of 10 and our BS detector is atrophied, that we won't question output of AI. We'll just, take it as truth. And that reality, I think, is pretty concerning to think about. But my personal sense is that it's going to be, in the next handful of years, there's going to be a case or two that start to crop up where somebody did something, and the question of what references did you use to verify this was the right case, or make sure that your differential is correct, is going to be called into question. Thankfully, we have guidelines that are going to be the things, if you use OpenEvidence specifically, are going to be the first things that pop up. And so regardless if you use AI or not, like, you should be relying on the guidelines. So as long as there's a source of truth, and that's what experts agree on is the source of truth, how you got there, whether it's, just knowing the guidelines or using AI, is probably less material. But I think if there's like failure to consider something and it's an unusual presentation of some type of stroke, like medullary strokes or brainstem strokes are commonly missed, posterior strokes of various varieties. Like, if you failed to consider this, like, did you think to put the symptoms into AI to check your differential, something like that? That's my bet. If I were a betting man, is going to be sort of the bellwether case that's going to lead to, I don't know, a lot of discussion about what that means for us and what that means for the liability of people delivering care.
Yeah, and some complicated like jury and verdict decisions, because
right.
I mean, that's a slippery slope. And yeah, like you said, hopefully that person just doesn't come in on my shift, or I'm retired by then, or I don't know, just making silly videos on social media at that point in my life. So, and the other thing about this is, like, how does this matriculate down, into our medical education system and residents, medical students, PAs, the whole 9 yards? Because I have this conversation with my children all the time about calculators, and, well, why can't I just use the calculator? And, I can just do that. And I try to tell them, no, put your phone away, put your calculator away, start doing this math. Like, and I just give them like math problems and things like that, because I'm like, in life, you need to know how to do these things. You may not have a phone, or, but to their point, well, it's a resource, they want to use it. So, I mean, there's definitely some of that, but I mean, as far as like, how does that going to impact our training? Is that going to water down some of the, residency programs and medical education,
Almost certainly, yes. And the reason is, again, human nature. The genes that tell us to take shortcuts and the easy way are the ones that allowed us to survive and conserve our energy for when we truly needed it. So if there's a shortcut or an easy way to get what in the immediate term feels like the right outcome, the outcome that's desired, most people are going to take it. I mean, there's the famous like Stanford marshmallow experiment. I think it was done at Stanford, where kids could be given one marshmallow immediately, or if they waited 10 minutes, given 2 marshmallows or something like that. It was a test of, are you willing to suffer a little bit for a long-term reward? And most people were not at that age. But it was interesting. They followed these children for decades. It's been a while since I read the study, but they found that their ability to wait for that second marshmallow reward was super highly correlated with their success in life in general. And it's not clear if that's can be learned or if that's more your disposition, probably a mixture of both. But if you can't, in terms that are going to guide your own behavior, live in a way that you're willing to suffer and put in hard work for delayed gratification, there's never been more ways to get immediate gratification. So if you're an immediate gratification kind of person, you're going to find one or many ways that you avoid these hard tasks and doing the things that are not immediately pleasant, but lead to your long-term fitness, fitness physically, if it's working out, fitness mentally, but just in general, forestalling gratification and doing hard work now with the anticipation that you're either learning something in the process and hopefully also, there's a reward waiting for you at the end for the hard work and the sweat equity that you put in. If that, I think, is the sort of the litmus test when I'm talking to my nieces and nephews and godchildren about the way that they're, thinking about their homework and what did they get, and trying to like elicit from them at least, like, what did you get out of that homework that, because you didn't like that you were doing it, but now is there something that you can see looking back on it that was meaningful and trying to make those connections? But I don't have to have all the solutions. I do think that's the largest risk factor. And it's borne out in historical studies, is if you want the easy way is becoming increasingly available.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just such a fine line and such a balance between, like you said, augmenting and trying to make ourselves more efficient and actually being smart about it. And, as opposed to replacing some of that critical thinking. And that's one of the things, as we kind of get towards a conclusion here, that I hear about all the time, is being like replaced, by AI. And I don't know that that's going to happen, like you said. But I guess the question is, where do we go in the next few years from now? Like, where are we 5 years from now? And, I'd love to hear your take on radiologists, because I think that radiology seems to be the low hanging fruit as far as from an AI model. Because I've uploaded X-rays myself, and it's been wrong before when I've uprated. I'm like, there's no way that was a fracture or whatever. So I'd love to hear your take on like where we go in 5 years from now, and is this going to replace some people, specifically radiologists, is one thing.
Yeah, I'm not a radiologist. I've heard both sides of the argument. One is that this fear led to people avoiding radiology as a training, and now we have a shortage of radiologists. Right. So it's like it makes a radiologist a lot more efficient, and we have a huge number of studies that people are waiting weeks and months for, radiology studies. I mean, there's interventional procedures, so I think that's not going away anytime soon, although Elon Musk's robot army that he's envisioning is close on the horizon if you take him at his word. I don't think that the hands-on stuff that we're going to do with patients is going to go away. If patient care is like you love it, then I would lean in on the things that are you interacting with patients. And if you're in radiology and you haven't done interventional training, you could go back and do a fellowship, or probably just start. I imagine you could do without a fellowship, like some courses and get credentialed at your hospital to do those kind of things. But there's a term, it's not my term, but it's called like a portfolio career. And I've really bought into that idea in the same way you think about a diversified portfolio for your investments. The way that is helpful is that it hedges the downside risk of not knowing how the future is going to look. And when you're all in on one thing, you're betting on a version of the future that means that that one thing is going to continue to be valuable in its current form. If you diversify your career, like you've done, like everyone on Shift Change has done, like I've done with my various startups, and I involved in like investing in part of a VC fund, my CMO position, podcasting, writing, like things that are not you being a clinical like bedside physician are going to help you for a world where clinical bedside physicians are replaced, or I mean, it might not be replaced by AI. It may be that PAs, nurse practitioners, are given increasing latitude and our pay stays the same or goes down. Their pay goes up maybe a little bit. And it's not that there's not work for you. It's just not paid at a level that makes it feel like you're getting what you deserve, which, you know, is arguably, I think that probably happened first. And it's also arguably worse than just losing your job, because if you lose your job, then you have to figure everything out. But you can tolerate sort of this undesirable, imperfect situation where the work is getting increasingly harder, like the frog that's, you know, sitting in the water because it's just slowly getting hotter and not jumping out because it's not boiling yet. So my sense is that I would figure out the things that are medicine adjacent that you're interested in. Start there, start playing with them, see which ones excite you. I think that's probably how you got where you're at today, John, and largely how I did too, is figuring out what is rewarding, and eventually that doesn't all pay, but it is building up a set of skills. And that set of skills, the more diverse it is, like the way your stock portfolio, the more diverse it is, the less likely that when some specific asset hits a downturn, that it's going to be destructive and ruin your career is much, much lower.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think one of the things that you mentioned when we first were talking about doing this show, and I don't know if we want to touch on that a little bit, was the experiment out of UT that talked a little bit about prescription refills. I was kind of intrigued by that.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting story, and I would encourage people to read about it, because I feel like I'm not going to do it full justice, but in Utah, they're forward thinking, and they created the Office of AI. So I was just at this conference in Baltimore and got to actually sit down for lunch with the director of this office in Utah, which is actually under the Department of Commerce, which is kind of the reason why it's making the news, is that the medical board didn't find out about this any sooner than the general public did. And the technology is delivered by Doctronic. I got to chat with their CEO as well. And they are predominantly a telehealth platform first. And what they have done is built technology, software really, that will allow for, in a future version, although it's not doing it right now, autonomous prescription refills for things like levothyroxine or statins, things that people don't need to see a clinician for almost ever. So I think it's got a lot of promising aspects. I don't think they went about it in sort of the most diplomatic way, and that's caused a lot of bad press. Maybe not starting off on the wrong foot, I would say. But it's going to, again, you're not comparing this solution to perfection. You're comparing it to the alternative. And Utah actually is one of the states with the worst primary care access. And how often do we see people come in because, they're just trying to do the right thing and there's no appointment. So they run out of their insulin and they're in DKA. Like, can we prevent these longer term bad outcomes? And sometimes it's not that immediate. Maybe it's somebody with heart disease and it accelerates faster than it would have because they can't get their statin for a year. They don't even want to try because it's so onerous of a process. So I think it does have a lot of hope. The no physician in the loop is a future version. They're using their telehealth network of doctors to sign off on every prescription, but it is like immediately you go to these kiosks, pay $5 or something a little bit less than that, I think, and you get a refill of a medication that, if you meet these criteria, like you've been on it for a while, your dose is stable, I think it incorporates your vital signs. But that is going to be a precedent, depending on if this goes well or not, for how quickly things move towards automating the parts of the job that honestly should be automated, because people are waiting a long time for very basic things. And like, by the time they get to me or you, and they're like, I need this medication refill, I was like, I can't believe first of all, the expense related to seeing an emergency physician for a refill. Right. But second of all, I can't believe how little of my brain energy needs to go into this process. So there has to be a solution where there's less burden to the patient and less cost to the healthcare system to do these chronic disease management sort of tasks. And I think that's, going to be like they say, beachhead, and that'll allow these autonomous workflows to start being brought in more broadly. And then the question is, what's the oversight going to be? And if something goes wrong, who's the defendant on this lawsuit? No one knows really right now.
Yeah, that's just like wildly polarizing. That whole topic, that whole story is like, I'm fascinated by it because I can see the potential and how that could really help patients, but I'm also terrified at the same time. That's wild. That's a wild thing. And like you said, this thing's growing so fast that we have to kind of have some checks and balances, and hopefully there's some bumpers in place here that allow us to try to keep up from a healthcare standpoint. And at least we're not going to keep up with the growth of AI, but at least kind of grow quickly and safely in that direction, because that's wild. That's a great story.
And progress won't happen if we have to overcome every theoretical objection before we try something out. So it's we got to find these sort of small niche use cases and start experimenting with them, and then allowing that to inform how we move forward. We don't like experimenting when it comes to patients' lives, but really we don't know what's right or wrong until we start trying some things. So as long as it's done with appropriate guardrails, I applaud what they're doing in Utah. I think that they're doing it with this physician in the loop sort of signing off process and oversight for a longer period of time than probably is necessary from a data science and accuracy of the model standpoint. But because they're the first ones doing it, I think for optics, they want to do that. I mean, it would have been a lot better if they had talked to the medical board, and I would advocate for a future where physicians continue to be involved in this. And I guess this would be a good way to wrap things up, because the last thing I wanted to say, and this is, was something that I was guilty of early in my career, was that I went to medical school and residency to be a doctor, and I didn't want to get involved in administrative decisions, and I didn't want to get involved in financial decisions, and I didn't want to, weigh different technologies. Those meetings were boring, especially as an emergency physician. They were boring, and it was usually on a day off. So I avoided them, and it turned out then my perspective wasn't represented, and then I was just forced to go along with the people who did show up at the meeting, what they wanted to do. So there's the expression I like to use, not my own as well, but is, if we're not at the table, then we're probably what's for dinner. And I felt that way many times in my career, is that there's been a series of decisions that were not taking into account our pain points and the things that actually make a difference for allowing us to do our job. So if you care about enjoying your job as a bedside clinician, then you have to get involved in these, as unpleasant or boring as it may seem, because otherwise decisions are going to be made, and they're probably not going to be, chances are not the one that you would like to see have had, the decision you'd like to have seen made.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up that quote, because that is like one of my all-time favorite quotes for sure. And probably the reason why I've been a director for 20 years of my career is just because I don't like people meddling in my ER without my knowledge or input, because, as you say, it's tedious to go to these meetings. It's painful. It's a burden. But at the same time, if I don't, and then they make a change to our workflow, by the way, people that are making these decisions have no idea what my workflow is. And then I'm like, why the hell did you do no? And then that's why I just sort of insist that I'm always at all these meetings, which is, I guess, my cross to bear. So,
well, and it's amazing too, if you actually go to these. The first time I went to one, I was like, wow, this is how the decision is made. Like, it's sometimes just like, because one person showed up and another person didn't, and the person who
exactly right,
normally would object to these kind of things because of X, Y, and Z just was like, on vacation or something like that. It's like the room where it happened sort of thing from Hamilton, is just like, once you're in that room and you're like, wow, this is really how the sausage is made. It's scary and in some ways empowering. So I try to look at the empowerment aspect of it, but it is kind of terrifying what can happen just with the constitution of a group who's making decisions.
Yeah, so that's the glass half full. I guess glass half empty is what, Terminator 3 or like iRobot? Is that where we're at with this?
Yeah, I mean,
the robots.
I would say, so I'm glad you bring that up because it's can be when you're dealing with an apocalyptic thing that's so all encompassing, it seems hard to know, like, what do I do? And I think climate change feels that way to me. And I just do what I can on a personal level. But this is in almost assured way a more immediate threat, if not existentially, to how money is aggregated amongst different companies in our country, and different communities being overrun by data centers and their water supplies being used for cooling servers instead of watering crops or people. All that stuff's happening now, and in the next few years is accelerating. There's a guy named Tristan Harris who launched this organization called the Center for Humane Technology. His focus was largely on social media. He actually made a movie called The Social Dilemma, which was on Netflix a few years ago, and now his focus is AI. So that organization, you can donate to it, you can be involved with it. There's also an organization called CHAI, CHAI, which is the Coalition for Healthcare AI, I believe. And they have a way to donate, get involved. They have resources to learn about this. But it's like the old G.I. Joe cartoon, knowing is half the battle. So educate yourself about it, because there's a lot going on, and it's affecting all of our lives now, and it will affect all of us more.
Yeah, for sure. And great movie, by the way, The Social Dilemma. I love that one. There's a lot of people that don't even have any idea that movie exists. And I think it's fantastic. It was very well done. So
yeah, watch that and the AI doc. And
I haven't seen that one yet, but you're like the third person that's told me to watch it. So
well, I'm glad people are talking about it. It's and they have a call to action at the end of that too, where there's like a QR code and you can sign up. But Social Dilemma and AI doc is a Saturday afternoon. Just make sure that you're not planning to go out and be social afterwards, because it will fill you with some existential dread. But at least from my standpoint, knowing is better than not knowing, because these things are going to happen predictably, the digital dementia piece specifically, to anyone who's not being very conscientious about how much of their brain they're outsourcing to technology.
Yeah, for sure. Well, when you're not, donating your brain to technology, where do you like to decompress? Do you like to go on vacation? Do you travel? What do you like to do?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. So, I mean, I love the work that I do. So I'm one of those people that, I'm told by everyone else that I'm working all the time, and I'm like, I actually enjoy it, but it can be tiring at times. I have leaned in and gotten into DJing recently in the last year. And so I've actually started to play some shows. I have a pretty nice setup at home, and it's great because you can just sort of dive right into it, and immediately your attention is all focused on how do you mix these tracks together. It's fun to learn. It gets me more invested in music, gets me out dancing a lot, which is good for the mind and body. Yeah. So I do that, and actually playing a show in Mexico a couple weeks from now. So that is a good excuse to travel to some cool places too.
That's amazing. That's really cool. A lot of people probably don't know this about me. I had a radio show all throughout college as well, and I used to DJ like a lot of the like parties and stuff, like the sorority and fraternity parties and stuff. So it's funny. And I think that's probably why I got into podcasting as well. But that's
you
really
have
cool.
A voice for radio. It's great.
Thanks for saying that. I was thinking the same about you. This is now totally awkward.
Well, I know I had a radio show in college too. So
nice. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think I had 10 listeners all 4 years.
10 listeners. Where can people find you? Where can people find you on either social media? I know you mentioned your website earlier. We obviously put a lot of this in the notes for the show to help promote what you're working on.
Oh, thank you. So my website is Josh Russell MD, all one word. So that's pretty easy to remember. My personal brand is The Focused MD, thefocusedexam.com. So all one word, The Focused Exam. And I have a blog, and I'm appearing on a lot of different podcasts. My life is a little busy right now for doing my own, although I do have intentions of launching that soon. But I have a blog, and if you want me to speak, I take speaking engagements through there, consulting engagements. I do one-on-one coaching with physicians and all different sorts of professionals, executives, and clinical healthcare workers. So that's the best place to find me. And then I'm most active on LinkedIn, which is just you can get this from my website, but it's just joshua-russell.md, I think, on after the word LinkedIn, but you can find me by that name. And that's where I'm kind of posting all my thoughts and all the articles that are worth reading, which there are a lot of.
Yeah, great follow for sure on social media. I'll definitely be sure to follow. I think I follow you now on LinkedIn, but I'll definitely make sure to do so. And definitely can't thank you enough for being on the show today. Tremendous conversation and insights into AI, which, like you said, is going to be something that we have to sort of be on board with and hopefully know our limitations. So can't thank you enough for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion, John. I hope to be back again sometime and have you on mine when we launch.
Yeah, I'd love to collaborate with you in any way, shape, or form, especially with our common love for DJing and music and everything else. That's great.
Yeah,
hopefully, the next couple shows that we have lined up, I have a one-on-one with a physician executive burnout coach, and I also have another lined up with a surprise guest that is going to talk a little bit about what it's like to fly in one of the Blue Angels. So I've got some cool content upcoming. But thanks again to Josh Russell for coming to the show today. And as I leave every show, as always, peace, love, and happiness to everyone out there. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks for joining us this week on Emergency Minute. Join us next time for more hard-hitting discussions on some of today's issues in healthcare. Don't forget to leave us a review on Spotify or follow on social media at Dr. J. Parente.